Funeral home horror stories carry a kind of energy that's hard to explain. Somewhere between silence and a whisper, where what's gone doesn't always stay gone. Like in the story you're about to hear, where a night watchman finds something inside a coffin, something that clearly wasn't ready to rest. But before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. And tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? On the first night I stepped into that funeral home, the clock struck exactly 11:07 p.m. The place already exuded an eerie silence. Not just any silence, but the kind of dense silence that seems to have weight, as if the very air was waiting for something to happen. I was there just to pick up some extra cash covering the shift for a security guard who, according to the owner, had a sudden anxiety attack. I thought it was a bit over the top, but I took the job. After all, easy money for basically walking around some corridors and watching cameras for 8 hours? I'm in. The funeral home was in an old building in Providence, one of those with a stone facade, cracked columns, and stained glass windows dulled by time. The smell of the place didn't help either, an uncomfortable mix of mold, cheap incense, and overly strong cleaning products. I felt like I was entering a place forgotten by God, even with all the lights on. But the owner, a somewhat glassy-eyed old man named Mr. Aldridge, assured me it was just my imagination. "Whatever you hear, ignore it. These walls just make noise," he said before leaving. I laughed, didn't think much of it. Maybe the other guy was just too impressionable. The first hour was smooth. I walked the corridors, peeked into the rooms, checked the locks, everything by the book. Upstairs was the office, but most of the building was on the ground floor, with several areas divided among the chapel, the entrance hall, a small break room, and the viewing room. This last one was where one of the display coffins was. Empty, according to Mr. Aldridge. Just a model to show the clients. When I first entered that room, I got goosebumps. Not from the cold, the air conditioning barely worked, but from a weird feeling, like someone had just left, or was still there. The lighting was dim, just 2 flickering fluorescent bulbs on the ceiling. The coffin was right in the center of the room, open, with the white interior lining perfectly arranged. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a coffin. Empty. I went back to my post, sat near the camera monitor, and started watching videos on my phone to pass the time. But as the hours went by, the atmosphere changed. The strong smell of incense became more intense, as if someone had lit another one right next to me. I got up from the chair and went to check the rooms again. Everything was the same. Everything. Too silent. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard the first knock. It came from the viewing room. 3 dry knocks, well spaced, as if someone was knocking from inside the coffin. I froze. For a moment I thought it was all in my head. I took a deep breath, grabbed the flashlight, and went there, trying to keep my cool and thinking it was just some vibration in the building. Maybe a rat, maybe creaking wood. Old things make noise. But as I approached the room's door, I felt a chill run up my spine. A real shiver that made me stop for a second in the middle of the corridor. I tried to laugh nervously, cursed myself mentally, and pushed the door open. The room was the same. The coffin, apparently in the same place. But the atmosphere had changed. It was denser. The air seemed heavier, as if the atmosphere inside had become solid. The smell of mold was stronger too. I slowly approached the coffin with the flashlight pointed directly at it. Nothing inside. But when I turned to leave, I heard it again. 3 knocks coming from inside there. But I had just looked. I went back, faster this time, and stared into the coffin. This time I hesitated. I didn't want to, but something pushed me. It was as if an energy pulled me toward it, as if curiosity was greater than fear. I lifted the lid with both hands, and this time, there was a body there. I held my breath for a few seconds. A pale body in a black suit, eyes closed, hands crossed over the chest. There wasn't supposed to be anyone there. I was sure the coffin had been empty before. Absolutely sure. I backed away at once, tripping over my own feet, and ran out of the room. I went back to the monitor, took 10 deep breaths, trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing explained that. No one had come in, no one had brought a body. I thought about calling Mr. Aldridge, but my phone had no signal. I looked at the cameras. The viewing room was there, everything still, silent, but my whole body said otherwise. I felt like someone was watching me, that classic feeling, you know? Like there's a pair of eyes following you even when you turn your head. I felt a shiver again. My whole nape was cold. I tried to ignore it, go back to the chair and wait for the shift to end. But then I heard the sound again. This time, it wasn't knocks. It was a scratching, like nails trying to tear fabric, coming from the same room, from inside the coffin. I grabbed the flashlight again, my hand trembling. I didn't want to go, really. But something made me move forward. When I got there, the door was already open. That made me stop right away. I had closed it, I was sure. The dim light in the room made everything seem even more distorted, and when I looked at the coffin again, the body was in a different position. Before I could think of anything, I felt a cold touch on my left shoulder. It was real, like a hand, but not human. I turned on impulse, but there was nothing there. Nothing that my eyes could see, at least. But the presence, it was there. Strong, almost tangible. I turned back to the coffin, and this time, the body was standing inside the coffin, looking at me with deep, dark eyes, the face expressionless, but the lips moved. He whispered, and what he said made me freeze completely. "Help me, please." For a few seconds, I just couldn't move. It wasn't just fear. It was as if my body had shut down. The guy, or whatever it was, kept standing inside the coffin, looking at me. But there was something wrong with his face. It seemed out of focus, like a blurred image. The more I tried to fix my eyes, the more my vision failed. He repeated, "Help me, please." The voice was low, almost a whisper, but I could feel it wasn't a normal voice. It seemed to come from inside my head. It echoed. It messed with something I couldn't name. And then he started to get out of the coffin, slowly, as if each movement tore the air. I didn't wait to see the rest. I turned and ran. I ran through the dark corridor without looking back. I just thought about getting out of there. But when I reached the main door, it wouldn't open. I held my breath. I turned the key, pulled the handle hard. Nothing. Locked from the inside. I started banging on the door as if someone outside would hear me. But the street was empty. That feeling of being trapped in a nightmare began to grow. I took a few steps back and listened. Again. Scratches. Now on the walls. First to my left and then to my right. And they were getting closer. As if something was crawling inside the structure of the building. I turned and ran to the room where the cameras were. The screen showed only static. All the cameras off. Except one, the one in the viewing room. And it showed the empty coffin. I tried to rationalize. Maybe I had snapped. Maybe it was just a dream. But then I heard the whispers. Weak at first, then stronger. Voices speaking at the same time, but none clearly audible. It was as if the entire building was whispering something. I stumbled out of the room. The corridors were darker than before. The lights flickered. With each step, I felt the floor vibrate slightly, as if something was moving down there. As if the building breathed. I passed by the chapel. The pews were all turned over, as if someone had run through there and knocked everything down. The candles, lit. But no one had lit them. They hadn't been like that before. And on the altar there was a figure. Shadowy. Still. Like a shadow darker than the others. Watching me. I closed my eyes. Took a deep breath. And when I opened them again, it was gone. I ran back to the hall. And that's when I saw the body again, standing in the middle of the corridor, upright, with its head slightly tilted to the side, watching me. "You need to see what they did to me," it said. The voice was now different, firmer, but still haunted, still distorted. I was shaking from head to toe. "What are you talking about?" I shouted. but it just turned its face toward the back of the corridor, where the door to the cold storage room was, one I hadn't even noticed before. Against everything my instincts screamed, I went. The door opened by itself as I got closer. Inside, there weren't just one body. There were several, covered with sheets, but one of them moved. I got closer, pulled the sheet with trembling hands. It was the same man, the same face, but now, completely still. Dead. No doubt. I took a step back and heard that whisper again. They left me trapped here. The lights in the cold storage flickered strongly. A strange energy ran through the environment, a buzzing inside my head. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the break room. The sun was weakly coming through the window. Everything seemed normal, silent, calm. I got up slowly, feeling my body heavy, as if I had run a marathon. I went to the main door. Open. Outside, the street was as always, empty, quiet. I left without looking back. I didn't go back for my things. I didn't ask for an explanation. I never set foot in that place again. And to this day, every time I hear a strange noise in the middle of the night, I remember that empty gaze inside the coffin and the plea for help that I never quite understood. There are things that don't want to be buried, and there are places where the silence is never just silence. Creepy, right? What did you think of that story? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the dead aren't ready to stay buried. Just like in the next story, where the weight of death goes far beyond the coffin and uncovers a family secret that's been hidden for generations. It all started to go wrong on the day of my grandmother's burial. And when I say go wrong, I'm not just talking about the sadness or the mourning. I'm talking about a kind of disturbance that can't be explained with words. It wasn't a normal wake, and anyone who knew my grandmother knew that very well. She wasn't just an old lady with a headscarf and a restrained laugh. She was a woman feared by many in the region, known for practicing voodoo and dealing with things that most people preferred to pretend didn't exist. I grew up hearing whispers about her rituals, that she sacrificed chickens in the backyard, buried jars with animal hair and bones by the river, and left offerings for entities in the middle of the night. My father never talked about it directly, but my mother made the sign of the cross every time her name was mentioned. And when we went to visit, no one stayed too long in that house. It seemed like time passed differently there. The clocks always stopped, the food heated up too quickly. And the strangest thing, no matter the time of day, the house always smelled of melted candle wax and burned herbs. When she died, it wasn't a surprise. She was already old and sick, but even so, the whole town became restless. The atmosphere changed. The sky turned gray and heavy, even without any forecast of rain. And on the day of the funeral, something seemed out of place. The funeral home, which was small and simple, was too crowded, too hot. The ceiling fan turned slowly, as if it were tired. And even with so many people, no one spoke loudly, just whispers, as if everyone was afraid of drawing attention. My grandmother's coffin was dark, made of heavy wood. It had some symbols carved on the side that I had never seen before, a kind of spiral with crooked crosses and figures that resembled serpents. They said it was her choice. She had left everything planned, even the cloth that covered her face, a dark red fabric which seemed more like part of some ritual than a Christian ceremony. At the time of carrying the coffin to the hearse, I was one of the 6 grandsons chosen to carry it. At first it seemed normal, heavy of course, but nothing out of the ordinary. But as we walked towards the exit, the weight increased. I swear by everything that is most sacred, that it seemed like the coffin gained pounds with every meter. There was a moment when 3 of us were almost tripping, sweating cold, as if we were carrying an extra body inside. We arrived at the cemetery half-dazed with trembling hands, and the worst was yet to come. When we started descending the hill that led to her grave, the ground seemed to pull the coffin backward, as if there was a force opposing the movement. The men who were helping were getting desperate, muttering curses. One of them, Jairo, even said he wouldn't continue. "There's something wrong with this," he said, looking at the coffin as if expecting it to move. Even with all the effort, it took us almost 15 minutes to reach the grave, which was already open. When they placed the coffin on the support, the ground around it became warm, and I'm not exaggerating. I felt the heat rising through the soles of my shoes, and it wasn't the heat of the sun. The sky was still overcast, somewhat greenish as before a storm. The ceremony itself was quick, almost hurried. The priest seemed uncomfortable, stumbled over his words, skipped parts of the reading. In the end, only my mother was crying. The rest of the family remained silent, looking at the ground as if afraid to look at my grandmother's covered face. When they started throwing the dirt, a warm breeze passed through the group. It wasn't a normal wind. It was as if it had come from inside the grave. After the burial, we followed to her house as was customary. A kind of final farewell, that informal ritual where relatives gather, remember stories, and have coffee. But no one was in the mood. My grandmother's house seemed larger than I remembered. The wood of the windows creaked on its own. The plants in the backyard were wilted, as if they had been burned. And inside the kitchen, the heat was suffocating. The stove wasn't even on, but it felt like there was a furnace inside. While the others spread out through the house, I went to the kitchen to drink a glass of water. But as soon as I stepped in, I felt something strange. The air was dense. A smell of smoke and old blood. The sink dripped slowly. The cabinet doors creaked, even without wind. And when I looked at the corner of the room, I almost dropped the glass from my hand. She was there. My grandmother, or at least something that looked like her, standing near the stove, holding hands with other women. But these others had no color in their faces, no movement. They seemed made of wax, and they were all looking at me. My grandmother's eyes were open, deep, and had an orange glow, like an ember about to go out. None of the women said anything, but I could hear something. It was as if they were speaking inside my head, in a language I didn't understand, but which gave me chills. The sensation was of being pulled, as if the kitchen were a hole of heat and darkness. My legs began to tremble. Fear paralyzed me for a moment, and when I finally managed to move, I ran out without looking back, hearing only the sound of the cabinets banging and something whispering my name very softly, as if coming from underground. I ran out of that house as if the ground were on fire. And to be honest, maybe it was. My feet burned inside my sneakers. Sweat ran down my back and my heart beat so hard, it felt like it was going to come out of my throat. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just got into my uncle's car and asked him to take me to the bus station. I made up some excuse, said I needed to go back to the city because of work. He just nodded as if he understood, but didn't want to know more details. No one wanted to talk about what had happened. No one wanted to name what everyone knew deep down was real. Since that day, I have never returned to my grandmother's house. Not even passed by the street. Not even looked at a map. It was as if that place had become a blind spot in my memory. A dark hole that I avoided at all costs. And yet, even with time passing, the images remained there. Clear, uncomfortable. The stuffy kitchen, the motionless figures, her eyes piercing through me. 30 years have passed. Many things have changed. I got married, had children, moved far away from that countryside where I grew up. But there hasn't been a single year when I didn't dream about that day. When I didn't wake up in the middle of the night sweating, with the feeling of being trapped inside a room that was too hot, hearing those muffled voices whispering things I still couldn't understand. And the worst, the more time passed, the clearer it became what I felt in those dreams. It wasn't just fear. It was as if I were being pulled back. As if what I saw, what was there in the kitchen with her, was still calling me. A slow, insistent call coming from within. Like a tide, a current pulling me even when I thought I was on solid ground. Sometimes I tried to tell this story to my wife. She said it was trauma, that my brain had recorded it in a distorted way because of the stress of the burial. And I even tried to believe that for a while. But then in one of those family conversations, my oldest cousin called me aside and said, "You saw it, didn't you?" That froze me. I didn't even need to ask what she was talking about. I just nodded silently. She said she went into the kitchen right after I ran out, that she also saw our grandmother. But in her case, the women were sitting around the table, all with a lit candle in their hands. And the floor was covered in black feathers. I never told anyone, but you saw it. I know you saw it. At that moment, something inside me was confirmed. It wasn't invention. It wasn't exaggeration. It wasn't a dream. It was real. And no matter how much time has passed, there are things that simply don't die. We bury them, throw dirt on top, say goodbye, but they remain there, waiting. My grandmother's kitchen was just a door, and that heat I felt wasn't just a strange detail. I truly believe that was hell. Not the kind from movies, full of fire and screams, but a more intimate, more subtle hell. One that starts inside our own home. A hell of memory, of accumulated energy, of a spell that was never undone. Nowadays, my children are adults, and sometimes, on some hotter nights, when the air is heavy and the fans seem unable to cope, I feel that heat rising through the soles of my feet again. The same heat from 30 years ago. The difference is that now, I hear my grandmother's name being whispered, softly, like a warning. This story has become almost a legend within the family. Everyone talks about it, but no one delves deep. We talk about the witch grandmother, the strange burial, the house that is now abandoned, and everyone has a different version of the vision in the kitchen. But none of these versions can explain what actually happened there. None can make sense of the spiritual presence that still haunts our memories. The only certainty I have is that, since that day, my life has never been the same. And no matter how much I try to move forward, there is a part of me that is still there, trapped in the hot kitchen, trying to understand why she was holding hands with other dead women. And why, to this day, I feel like I'm being watched by something that never rested. Maybe one day I'll have the courage to go back to that house, but honestly, part of me thinks that if I enter there again, I won't be able to leave. Chilling, isn't it? Some secrets never get buried, and others come back with open eyes, begging to be seen. The next story starts with a nameless body, but ends with questions no one dares to answer. That night, the rain poured heavily on the roof of the Pine Grove funeral home, as if the entire sky had decided to collapse all at once. It was nearly 11 at night, and I was just about to finish my shift when the phone rang. I almost let it ring until it stopped, but something inside me told me to answer. On the other end of the line, the voice was firm and dry. They had just found an unidentified female body and wanted me to prepare it immediately. They said the transport was already on its way and that the case was delicate. That was all. No name, no age, nothing. Just the instruction. Prepare for further analysis. At the time, I didn't think anything was strange. Cases like this happen more often than you might think. People without documents, without anyone around, end up here, waiting for answers that rarely come. But as I hung up the phone, a strange feeling began to accompany me. It wasn't fear, nor exactly discomfort. It was as if the air had become heavier, a negative energy that seemed to spread through the place slowly, like a mist that no one sees, but feels. I prepared myself as always. Gloves, lab coat, instruments. When the vehicle arrived, I went to the receiving area. The two men who brought the body didn't say a word. They just handed me the standard paperwork, laconic, incomplete, and placed the stretcher in the preparation area. I thanked them with a brief nod, and they left without even looking back. The silence took over the room again, interrupted only by the continuous sound of the rain outside. I removed the sheet covering the body. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s. Fair skin, long brown hair, soft features, as if she had fallen asleep in a moment of peace. No apparent signs of violence, no clues about who she was. In the corner of the sheet, only the initials handwritten, SD. I spent some time just observing. There was something about her face that bothered me, but I couldn't understand what. Maybe it was the contrast between the serenity of her expression and the fact that she was there, dead. or almost. I started the standard procedure: cleaning, external inspection, preparation of the instruments for the injection of preservation fluids, everything within what I've been doing for over 15 years. But when I went to apply the first needle point to the carotid artery, I saw something that made me freeze for a few seconds. Her eyelids moved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. A small tremor, as if the eye beneath the skin had reacted to the touch. I stopped, took a deep breath. I thought it was tension. Maybe the body was still experiencing muscle spasms. It happens. It's not common, but it happens. I continued. But that bad feeling, that thing in the air, it only got worse. It was as if someone was standing behind me, watching me in silence. Several times I turned my face to check, but the room remained empty. Even so, the chill on the back of my neck didn't go away. And the more I worked on that body, the clearer the feeling that something was wrong there. As if that girl was conscious, present. During the main injection, I noticed that her skin seemed to react differently, didn't become rigid as it usually does. And her eyes, even closed, seemed to follow me. I know how this sounds, I know. But it was the exact feeling that there was someone in there trapped, watching everything without being able to move. I decided to finish quickly. I adjusted her face, aligned her arms, prepared the body to spend the night in the cold chamber. I did everything automatically, without looking at her for too long. When I closed the chamber door and turned off the light, the energy in the environment seemed to have finally subsided a bit. I left the room as if I were leaving a minefield. And I went home, trying to pretend that nothing different had happened that night. But sleeping that night was impossible. And the next morning, when I returned to the funeral home and opened the chamber to check the body, I was faced with something that made me lose my breath for a few seconds. Sarah D., the young woman with no name and no history, had her eyes completely open. Fixed, glassy eyes, but open, looking straight at me. For a moment, I just froze. I couldn't move or think. I kept staring at those open eyes as if I were trapped in some kind of trap. It wasn't just the fact that they were open, it was the way they looked at me, as if she were still in there, conscious, recognizing me. It didn't seem like the empty gaze of a corpse. It seemed an appeal. I closed the chamber door with a dry snap and took 2 steps back, my heart beating in my neck. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the pressure of the cold, maybe a post-mortem spasm. The body could have moved. Sometimes the eyes open on their own due to the muscles relaxing. But the truth is that I had never seen anything like it, never like that. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, and called Dr. Almeida, the town's medical examiner. I explained briefly, without going into too much detail, and asked him to take a look. He arrived about an hour later, bringing that skeptical and methodical manner of his. A guy who has seen it all and isn't easily shaken. I took him to the room, opened the chamber, and her eyes were closed again. I remained silent for a few seconds, not knowing what to say. The doctor did a quick inspection, measured the temperature, rigidity, and only confirmed the obvious. The body showed no signs of vital activity, no apparent anomalies. Collapsed lungs, stopped heart, no suspicious marks. According to him, it was just another body. But I saw what I saw. I felt what I felt. After he left, I decided to proceed with the final preparation before sending the body to the special analysis laboratory, as they had asked me. It was as if I just wanted to finish that quickly and never think about it again. I put on the lab coat, put on the gloves, and started the last step. But as I approached her face again, that feeling came back with full force. The feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia, it was something almost physical. The air seemed dense, as if it had turned into a kind of invisible liquid, slowly drowning me. Each small sound echoed in the room like a distant whisper. I focused, continued the process, but my hand was trembling. I felt a slight tingling in my arm as I adjusted her fingers. Her eyes were well closed now, but her face had changed. It was subtle, but the expression seemed more tense, as if something inside her was stirring, even with the body immobile. In the middle of the procedure, I heard a noise coming from the corridor, a dry, metallic snap. It sounded like the steel drawers of the chambers opening by themselves. I ran there, my heart racing, but nothing. Everything was exactly as before. No drawer open, no door out of place. But when I returned to the preparation room, Sarah's right hand was hanging off the table. That paralyzed me. I was sure I had left the arms aligned along the body. Her arm couldn't have fallen like that on its own, and once again I felt that presence. A strange energy, as if something was trying to communicate. A desperate attempt to say, "I'm still here." I was at my limit, with my nerves exhausted. I finished what was left as quickly as I could. I didn't say anything. I didn't pray. I didn't close her eyes again. I just covered the body with the sheet, called the transport, and waited, alone, in that suffocating silence. After they took the body, I spent the whole night awake, thinking, trying to understand. That experience didn't leave my head. I spent days reflecting on it all, about what I saw, what I felt. I began to question the very definition of death. Do we really understand what happens in the final moment? And if there is something between the last breath and the true end? Sarah D. was never claimed. No family, no friends, no news in the papers. The official medical report came out as undetermined cause. She simply appeared, lived that moment with me, and disappeared into the silence of a cold chamber. Since then, nothing has been the same. Each body I prepare now carries a different weight. I run my hand over the eyelids more carefully. I listen to the sounds around me more attentively. Sometimes I catch myself observing the faces for a few minutes, trying to understand if there is someone there, trying to come back. But what remained the most was her gaze. That last gaze, fixed, direct, alive. A memory that doesn't abandon me. As if she were still out there, trapped between two worlds, waiting for someone who never came. And me, I'm still here between the dead and the living, trying to pretend that I understand something. But deep down, I know. There are mysteries that we can't explain. And perhaps we shouldn't. That was bizarre. When the line between life and death starts to blur, even the most seasoned professionals begin to question what's real. And doubt hits even harder when you find a space that should have never been opened, like the basement in the next story. But before we go on, if you've made it this far, it probably means you're enjoying these stories. So go ahead and hit the like button. It helps tell YouTube you want more of this kind of content, and make sure you don't miss any future horror stories. What marked me the most in that house wasn't the smell of formaldehyde, nor the heavy silence of the corridors. It was the sound coming from the floor, as if someone was always one floor below, even when I was sure there was no one else there. My grandfather owned a funeral home in Boise, Idaho, an old colonial house 2 stories high with tall windows and glass that trembled with any strong wind. He had taken care of that place for decades, and since I was 19, I began helping him with the simpler tasks: cleaning, organizing documents, assisting with small wakes. The heavy stuff, embalming, applying makeup to the bodies, preparing them for the casket, he did alone. He said I didn't have the stomach for it, and honestly, I was grateful for that. The house had a smell that was hard to explain, a mix of old wood, cheap lavender, alcohol, and something else, something sweet and sickly like overripe fruit. At night, the walls creaked and the steps groaned even when no one was stepping on them. I tried not to pay attention, but over time it was impossible to ignore certain things. There was always that uncomfortable feeling that I wasn't alone, even when I locked all the doors. One Saturday afternoon, my grandfather called me to the lower part of the house and asked me to do a thorough cleaning of the embalming room. He said he needed everything clean for a preparation he would do the next day, and that he himself was going out to get supplies. I was left alone there with a box of gloves, buckets, and cleaning products. The room was at the back, behind a double door of dark wood. It was cold, stuffy, with a metal workbench in the center and old cabinets on the walls. I started with the floor, then cleaned the baseboards and organized the instruments in the cabinets. That's when I noticed something strange. A piece of the baseboard seemed loose, different from the others, as if it had been fitted there in a hurry. Curious, I inserted a spatula and forced it gently. The panel made a slight snap and opened. Behind it, there was a dark opening, a rectangular hole that seemed to lead to some kind of corridor. My first impulse was to leave it alone. But you know that restlessness that comes out of nowhere? That inner voice that whispers that there's something there you need to see? Well, that's it. I grabbed a flashlight and crouched down. The entrance led to a narrow tunnel, with brick walls covered in dust and wooden beams on the ceiling. It was so tight that I had to walk half-bent. The air was dry and the smell changed immediately. It became heavy, somewhat musty, with that kind of odor that reminds you of a forgotten basement. As I walked, I began to feel a strange chill on the back of my neck, as if something was accompanying me in silence. There was no sound, but my body screamed that I should turn back. I continued anyway. The corridor made a curve, and after about 10 meters, I reached a small room. It was just a square space with brick walls, an old blanket thrown in a corner, and right in the center, a rocking chair. That image stopped me. The chair was facing me, perfectly positioned, as if it were waiting for someone to sit. The strange thing was that the floor around it had marks, deep scratches, as if something heavy had been dragged several times. I approached slowly, trying to understand what it all meant, and it was at that moment that the chair began to rock, slowly, back and forth, alone. I froze. I swear, there was no draft, no incline, nothing that could explain it. And then I noticed something else. On the walls around there were more marks, like claws. Long, irregular marks that crossed each other as if someone had tried to climb or get out of there. My heart started beating fast. My hand trembled holding the flashlight. But still, I went to look at a metal chest leaning against the corner of the room. It was rusty, but I managed to open it. Inside, there were several old black and white photographs, all somewhat faded, showing people who seemed to be at wakes or dead. Some portraits were of children, others of entire families with rigid, cold expressions, as if they had been forced to pose. At the bottom of the box, there was an envelope. Inside it, a handwritten note. He who sees what he should not carries the weight of what was forgotten. That's when I heard it, a deep, dragging sound, as if something was coming through the corridor I had passed through. Slowly, scratching the walls, the sound became clearer. First, just that slow dragging like nails on stone. Then came a heavier noise like something being pulled with effort, as if it had mass, weight. The flashlight began to fail. It flickered, sputtered, and the beam of light trembled like my arm. I wanted to run, I wanted to get out of there right away, but my legs seemed rooted to the ground. The chair still rocked even without wind. And for a second I thought I saw something forming on it. A shadow, something that seemed to take shape sitting there. My eyes tried to adjust, but it was like looking into a dense fog, with that kind of presence you feel before you see. It was the sound that snapped me out of my trance. Something hit the wall hard on the other side of the corridor. A dry crash followed by a low, muffled moan. I bolted. I stumbled through that narrow tunnel, hitting my shoulder against the walls, trying not to drop the flashlight. I just wanted to see the light of the main room again. But the sound followed. That followed me. It didn't run. It didn't scream. It just followed, calmly, as if it knew that sooner or later it would catch up with me. When I reached the secret entrance, I threw myself out and pushed the panel with all my might. It snapped back into place with a dry click, and everything fell silent. I was sweating cold, my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. I stayed there, crouched in the corner of the room, trying to understand what had happened. The next day, my grandfather didn't even ask why I hadn't finished cleaning. He also didn't comment when, a week later, I found the same rocking chair, stored in the garage, covered by an old sheet. I had never noticed it before, but it was the same. And that night the creaks returned. Only now. They came from the wall of my bedroom. That's when I decided to leave the house, quit that job, and since then, Every time I hear any creak in the silence, my whole body freezes, because I know there are things that we see, and that continue to see us. Creepy stuff, huh? What did you think of that one? Rate it from 0 to 10 down in the comments. I want to know what you think. I wasn't supposed to be there, at least not like that. When I accepted the transfer to the crematorium department, I thought it would just be another part of the job, nothing I hadn't seen, experienced, signed, or stamped before. But it wasn't. Before that, my daily routine was paperwork. Death certificates, cremation authorizations, everything very impersonal. It was as if I were always 2 steps away from death. I knew it was there, but I didn't have to face it head on. But that day, we were short-staffed. And since I had taken a technical course in thanatopraxia years ago, they asked me to help prepare the body of a woman who was to be cremated later that afternoon. I felt uncomfortable, of course, but I said yes. The woman was young, in her early 30s at most. She had marks on her arms and face. Ugly to see. Her record said, "Death by cranial trauma." There was also a police report attached to the file. Her partner, a man who seemed to be disgusted with himself in the police station photos, had been arrested in the act, the kind of tragedy we pretend not to read about. But I read it. I couldn't help it. The worst part was when her children arrived. 3 of them, all minors. They had come with their grandmother, the oldest with empty eyes, the youngest clutching a doll, and the middle one. He seemed the most shaken. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the ground with an expression of guilt that tied my stomach in knots. The grandmother cried softly. They wanted to say goodbye. That's when they called me to prepare the body for the visit. I entered the conservation chamber and felt a chill run up my spine. The air in there was different. It wasn't just cold. It was a kind of cold that seemed to come from within. And the refrigeration system had just been turned off for cleaning. But it was colder than it should have been. I started the process almost automatically. I changed the sheet, fixed her hair, covered the visible marks with makeup. I did everything by the protocol. But when I went to position her hands over her chest, I felt a strong tingling in my fingers, as if I had touched a live wire. And then, without warning, came the dizziness. I felt the room spin. I leaned my hand on the edge of the stretcher to keep from falling. A metallic taste rose in my throat. I sat on a stainless steel bench, my hands trembling, trying to understand if it was low blood pressure or fatigue. But I've been tired before. That wasn't just it. Gradually, the dizziness subsided, but a strange weight remained in the room. A presence. As if someone had stopped behind me. I swear I felt a breath on my neck. I turned quickly, but of course there was no one there. The door was still locked. The feeling of being watched continued, a negative energy that seemed to come from the walls, the ceiling, the woman lying there. Out of nowhere, I had an absurd urge to talk to her children. Something inside me screamed that I needed to say something, and I knew what. It was as if she herself had put the words in my head. Tell him it wasn't his fault, the middle one. He thinks he could have done something, but he couldn't, and I forgive him. These were the words that came out of nowhere, with a clarity that scared me. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't. I had never experienced anything like it, not in the night shifts, not in the wake stories that the old-timers in the department like to tell. This was different. It was personal and real. But how do you say that to someone? How do you look at a 12-year-old boy and tell him that his dead mother spoke to you? I felt ridiculous just thinking about it, even more so after what came next. The next day, I had a consultation. I had been having some strange headaches for months. The MRI had shown an alteration, a small tumor, benign, but in a sensitive area. And at that moment, everything that happened that day in the crematorium came back to my mind. What if it was all just in my mind? A hallucination? A breakdown? I decided to stay silent. I didn't tell anyone anything. Not the boys, not the grandmother, not the people at work. I preferred to believe it was just a coincidence. A mix of emotion, tension, and maybe a little tumor poking the wrong wires in my brain. But the cold in that room. I never felt anything like it again, even with the heater on full blast, even after everything was turned off. And that was just the beginning. The cold wouldn't let go of me. Even with the heater on, that room felt like a frozen hole in the middle of summer. I stood there, staring at her body, feeling that invisible presence that wouldn't let up. The silence was too heavy, almost suffocating, as if the air itself had turned to lead. As I adjusted the sheet one last time, the feeling of being watched came back with full force. It seemed like dark, empty eyes were poking me in the back. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and my heart raced for no reason. I tried not to think, but a low voice, almost a whisper, called my name. There was no one there, I know, but my mind seemed to want to convince me otherwise. I wanted to move, to get out of there, to flee that charged environment, but my feet were glued to the floor. That's when I heard it. Not a common sound, but a dragged whisper that seemed to come from her body itself. Forgiveness. It was a word, simple but full of pain, that echoed in my chest. At that moment, I wanted to kneel and apologize for not being able to prevent it all, for not doing anything to save that woman, to protect those children, a feeling so dense of guilt and sadness that it almost made me cry. But crying there, in the middle of the crematorium, would be too much for anyone. After that, everything felt strange. The air became heavier, and a sensation of intense weakness came over me. I felt my legs wobbly, my vision blurred, and my breathing accelerated. I remembered the old stories of colleagues who said that the energy of death is not just absence, but something alive, that sometimes doesn't want to leave. When I regained my focus, I took one last look at her face. It seemed peaceful, as if the suffering had been taken with her. Even so, that spiritual presence still seemed to be there, insisting on not saying goodbye. Her children returned to the crematorium shortly after, but I decided not to say anything. Professional silence protected me. Maybe it was better that way. Today, I still think about what happened. If it was indeed a supernatural experience, an encounter with something beyond life, or just a strange moment of the mind, influenced by stress and fear. One thing I know: death is not just the end. Sometimes it carries stories that do not fall silent, voices that want to be heard, and energies that insist on staying, even when they should have already departed. And if you ask me if I believe in all this, I'll just say that after that night, I learned to respect the silence of the crematorium, because there, among the bodies and the shadows, something much deeper and unsettling is always lurking. There are some things we live through that we never forget. And after that last story, it's easy to understand why some people never speak about what they've seen. If you made it this far, comment, "I saw what no one else saw." Only those who stayed till the end will get it. While you're here, hit that subscribe button so you can keep hearing the kinds of stories no one else dares to tell, but that we know need to be told. And if this strange journey gave you chills, leave a like. It helps us keep bringing you these eerie experiences that feel so unreal. They must be true. There's another video right here that keeps the creepy vibe going. Click it and come with me. There are still so many stories left to tell.